We've never talked about North Korea as much as we have in recent years, and yet we've never known so little about it. On September 3, 2025, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made a strong impression by appearing publicly alongside the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, during a military parade orchestrated in Beijing. The first official appearance of his daughter, Kim Yoo-hae, also surprised observers, symbolically reflecting a moment of solidarity displayed between the two powers. This meeting, preceded by several days of intense discussions, took place in a positive atmosphere, where trade between China and North Korea has reached its highest level in several years, with a nearly 30% jump in bilateral trade in June 2025 compared to the previous year, reaching $229 million in that single month. Yet behind this facade of rapprochement and cooperation, tensions remain palpable, both economically and in general matters. The reflection of a very fragile balance between two states with intertwined, but also often contradictory, interests. Welcome to Terabellum. To understand this alliance, we first need to look back at more than 7 decades of tumultuous history. North Korea was saved from a probable defeat during the Korean War, thanks to the decisive intervention of Communist China, which had just been established. The Sino-North Korean coalition made it possible to establish an armed status quo, creating a still sensitive border and an alliance system that remains significant today. Since that time, despite an apparent ideological bond based on communism and socialism, the relationship has always shown underlying tensions. China has often been seen as a protective but demanding big brother, while Pyongyang has cultivated a wary stance toward any external influence, even friendly ones. This balance has long relied on a posture of economic and military asymmetry in favor of North Korea. With regard to China, this is counterbalanced by the buffer and strategic shield role that Pyongyang provides for Beijing in the region. We must have already talked about this on the channel. The North Korean economy is notoriously closed, opaque, and unstable. Pyongyang imposes strict control over the flow of information, making it almost impossible to collect reliable data. Nevertheless, thanks to cross-analysis of data, satellites, testimonies, and limited reports, we know that the country is facing rampant inflation. In a context of strong dollars and severe structural tensions, the authorities channel significant resources toward the military and large-scale projects, thus limiting investment in essential productive sectors. This economy remains deeply influenced by the Juche ideology, advocated by Kim Il-sung, the founding father of the regime. Juche is based on 3 pillars: political independence, economic self-sufficiency, and military self-defense. This doctrine, while reinforcing a unifying nationalist narrative, has also increased the country's isolation and economic hardship, which has never truly benefited from technological or commercial integration with the outside world. For better or for worse, the country suffers from chronic underinvestment in key sectors such as mining, metallurgy, textiles, and agriculture, and it has to deal with inefficient collective agriculture and unfavorable natural conditions. And yet Kim Jong-un is living his best life because in this context, China has become North Korea's main economic partner, while Russia, struggling with the war in Ukraine, has little means to support Pyongyang. Even though this partnership remains strong and significant, I invite you to watch the 2 dedicated videos. China, with its economic and strategic strength, ensures, through trade and economic support, the survival of the North Korean regime. It also seeks to maintain a stabilizing role on a Korean peninsula marked by tension between Washington and its allies. In 2025, there is a notable recovery in bilateral trade. Chinese exports to North Korea increased by more than 33% in the first half of the year. Meanwhile, North Korean imports, often in sectors such as textile production and mining, increased by 20%. These increases reflect the partial easing of international sanctions and the development of a multipolar order, where Kim Jong-un is living his best life. But they are also accompanied by a paradoxical phenomenon. Despite an apparent recovery, major Chinese investment projects are stagnating. Victims of North Korean political withholding toward its partners, The recent history of Sino-Korean projects illustrates the complexity of this cooperation. For example, the case of the Musan iron mine is emblematic. In 2007, a Chinese consortium, which included the prestigious Tonghua Iron and Steel Group, obtained the rights to operate the mine for 50 years. With an investment exceeding $900 million, this project also involved the construction of railway infrastructure to transport the ore to China. Yet after 2 years, Pyongyang abruptly and inexplicably ended this partnership, causing substantial losses for Beijing. This kind of rupture is simple and symptomatic of the constant risk faced by Chinese investors in this country, and similar cases have followed. For example, the Chinese company Qingyang, which had launched an iron extraction and processing project, was removed from the mine. After building a processing plant, the company was forced to leave the project without compensation. This example illustrates the level of legal and contractual uncertainty in North Korea. Furthermore, the project for the new bridge over the Yalu River from Haengdong in China to Sinuiju in Korea has been suspended on the North Korean side since 2020. Another example of this political use of economic relations is the unfinished bridge, which now serves as a diplomatic lever in bilateral negotiations between Beijing and Pyongyang. As you can see, this relationship is much more ambiguous than one might think. But despite these frequent breaks, China continues its support, aware of the strategic importance of stabilizing the peninsula and curbing American influence. Beijing therefore agrees to tolerate commercial losses and high risks in North Korean affairs in 2025. Chinese investors continue to flock to North Korea, especially in the export of heavy construction equipment or in the exploitation of resources. However, the Chinese government avoids any overly ambitious ventures, not only to limit the risks if North Korea were to abandon the project overnight, but also because of the risk of being sanctioned by the United States and the United Nations. What must be understood is that the main constraint comes not just from sanctions, but mainly from the North Korean leadership's refusal to relinquish economic control. Kim Jong-un especially fears that too much economic liberalization could facilitate the emergence of pro-market rival factions, which could destabilize the regime. There are even indications that these groups may already exist within the state apparatus. And in response, Pyongyang has recently tightened its control over foreign trade, questioning the main trading companies in North Pyongyang province, a key sector of North Korea's foreign trade. All these hardships are due to one thing. Remember that North Korea's essential role lies in its geostrategic function. Pyongyang has long been a tool for China, allowing it to avoid being bypassed by American forces stationed in Japan and South Korea. This geographical buffer position is complemented by a strategic lever, since China hopes to exert influence over the Korean peninsula through its ally. However, North Korea's nuclear weight complicates the picture. Some Chinese and international experts, for example, fear an uncontrollable escalation, which could risk drawing Washington further into the region rather than pushing it away. Pyongyang's recent warming ties with Moscow amid the Ukraine war complicate things. I'll summarize the 2 videos I made on this topic, which I encourage you to watch. But North Korea has provided military support to Russia by sending personnel and resources, and this tremendous increase in complexity puts Beijing in a delicate position, torn between its desire to keep control over North Korea and the fear of its ally spiraling out of control, or in any case, a partial emancipation. In summary, this partnership is defined by strengths and their weaknesses, such as its interdependent relationship. China guarantees the economic and diplomatic survival of North Korea, while Pyongyang acts as a strategic shield against American influence in Asia. Finally, bilateral trade, even if limited, keeps North Korea's sanctioned economic structure alive. And through this alliance, China asserts its ability to influence the region, which is essential in the context of global rivalry with the United States. On the weakness side, there is the extreme unpredictability of Pyongyang, which breaks contracts, bans certain companies, and limits economic development. There is also the near total absence of economic reforms, which prevents any modernization of the country. And finally, the distrust of North Koreans toward China remains a major obstacle, with a rejection of any concession that could weaken the regime's political control. We can suggest several avenues for development in the coming years. Based on current data and trends, we can outline a few scenarios. First of all, Pyongyang will probably continue a cautious double-game strategy, seeking indispensable Chinese assistance, while strictly limiting its influence on economic and political sovereignty, and especially taking advantage of the multipolar context. And, of course, I'm talking about its growing partnership with Russia. Finally, China will always maintain a calibrated support, avoiding getting too economically involved, while seeking to moderate North Korea's nuclear and military ambitions. On the other hand, tensions between Beijing and Pyongyang could increase if the pro-reform faction within North Korea gained importance, forcing China to redefine its alliance strategies. And finally, the geopolitical context, marked by uncertainty in Taiwan, Chinese-American rivalries, and closer ties with Russia, will continue to weigh heavily on the decisions and behavior of both countries. With, for the moment, a relative advantage in the hands of Kim Jong-un, as you can see, the China-North Korea alliance is far from being a simple diplomatic partnership. Far from the stereotypes, it is the result of a shared history, deep and contradictory strategic interests, and a forced coexistence between dependence and mistrust. While Beijing plays its role as a powerful global actor and guardian of a precarious regional stability, Pyongyang cultivates its independence, or rather, its self-imposed isolation, blessed by Juche, constantly challenging its allies. In this game of deception, China continues to support North Korea, despite the many risks and losses, because the price of instability on the peninsula would be much higher. But this fragile relationship, with its unexpected breaks, economic tensions, and security challenges, will remain a central element of Asian geopolitics, destined to play a key role in redefining global power relations in the coming decade.